Hey everybody, this is Adams, and this is where I look at some of my favorite pots from Edmund de Waal's The Pot Book and talk about how they were most likely made. And it's a great book. I recommend it to everybody. There's some just best examples throughout ceramic history of the world, assembled by Edmund de Waal, who's right here. And the book is in the Brooklyn Clay Library for anyone who's in the area and wants to look at it. Today we're going to be looking at Thomas Toft's mermaid dish from the late 1600s. He was a potter in that time who was in the Western Midlands of England, and he had a pretty, I think, good career. Unfortunately I think he died poor, but he had a good production run, I think, when he was doing it full time. And of course, it was so long ago, don't know too much about him. But page 274, anyone who's following along. And so he's really recognized because there's a good number of these quote-unquote chargers, large plates, that survive. He was really characteristic of the style. He had a lot of mermaids, the king and queen a lot, coats of arms, that kind of stuff. And because these were a little larger than normal dinner plates, I think these were more for decoration rather than functional use, which is probably why they survive, because they weren't used other than to look at, marvel at. And this style that he has, this slip trail decoration style, was characteristic of the area he was in, the Western Midlands, during this time especially. And how this came about was that the area is known for its slipware, which is when you have a mold that you make and pour liquid clay into it and can reproduce these exact multiples over and over again. A lot of potters who enjoyed and I think had the skill set to make pottery would use this slip that was probably easily accessible and probably cheap to decorate on rather than to actually work on. You can see he used I think in the region it was mostly red clay that was available. So he used this white slip to kind of cover it to, give a nice white neutral background. And then a dark red or, not quite black and a lighter red to use as for detail or for the foreground. And you can see it's all kind of amber tinged, and this was due to the leaded glaze that they were using. Just the clear, quote unquote, clear lead glaze would always go a little amber. So he used this style a lot, and first I'll talk about making a charger or plate. What I did for a long time was just do it, kind of make the plate intuitively, like make a wide base and kind of play with this part, the lip a little bit until it looked right, and then kind of trimmed it and did what I think most people do. What I learned recently was this kind of nicer way that seems counterintuitive at the time, but gives you a little more control and provides a little more compression in the clay that makes it a little less prone to warping and a little less problematic, really. And honestly, I find it easier and you fuss over it a little less. But the process is making, doing your coning when you're on the pottery wheel, making essentially a pancake, and then using your rib, dragging your rib along the base of whatever excess surface of a bat you have, and moving the pancake of the clay inwards. It drives the clay upwards against the rib, and then it just follows the rib up. And so you have a pretty thin wall around the diameter of around the circumference rather of your clay, and then you just push it over. It makes a lot more sense when you kind of see it in person. But with that compression of clay that the rib did, it keeps it from warping as much, or it keeps it from breaking as much. You have a little more control, and honestly, I find it a lot more easier. And then, of course, trim it like you would see hopefully if you're taking a class, your teacher would tell you a couple of good details on trimming. But then after it's in the kind of it's trimmed up, you put on the leather hard stage 1 or 2 coats, depending on the thickness of the slip, on it to give it that whiteness. You can then use a couple slip trailing tools, whether it's like a squeeze bottle with a couple different openings. It could be, I always used sort of like an ear syringe, they call it. You can get it at like a pharmacy. And it's a tool, I feel like it's around just because people might use it once and never use it again. But it's a nice loose squeeze bottle with a kind of small opening. You can get some online, of course. Or it could be as simple as a plastic bag filled with slip with just a tiny hole in it. Think of like more toward cake decoration or something. But you can see like he only had a couple colors to work with, but he did a lot out of them. And you can see that one. A couple different options we have here. I think especially now with like the folk art and outsider art revival, even though he was a potter, functioning potter for several decades, it does have that kind of folk art look to it that's popular now more than ever, really. It appeals to me for sure. And it's a lot of really great work in a really nice kind of a plate or charger too. And here's a good detail just so you can see. He was probably applying all this decorative slip when the slip he put on in the plate was in like a drier leather hard stage. So it wasn't fully dry, of course, but it was dry enough it was wet enough for the slip to absorb into it a little bit, but not absorb so much that it would flatten out or anything would happen for it. So it still retained these kind of raised lines that I think functionally would make it really hard to eat off of without chipping or something, but decoratively provides this nice other kind of three-dimensional element on it. Produces some nice pieces. So that's Thomas Toff. Thanks for listening.